Hi everyone, welcome to DFestival's Meet the Masters series. We are very honored to introduce Andrew Tyson. Hailed as a real poet of piano by BBC Radio 3, the first prize winner at the Géza Anda Competition, a laureate of the Leeds Competition, and the recipient of the prestigious Avery Fisher Career Grant. Professor Tyson renowned for his distinctive artistry and compelling interpretations. He's captivating audiences worldwide. In this interview, we will explore themes that lie at the heart of piano artistry, which are improvisation, experimentation, and the enduring influence of late 19th and early 20th century pianists. Together, we'll delve into how improvisation shaped classical music's history, and we will also examine the innovative spirits of legendary pianists from that era, and discuss how their legacy continues to inspire modern musicians. Welcome, Professor Tyson. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much. We're so looking forward to have you in the festival. First of all, we'd like you to talk about your career highlights. Could you tell us about what's your most memorable performance or competition experience and how did it shape your career?
I think I've had an atypical path as a musician. I started out learning piano as a child in North Carolina. And growing up, the first thing I enjoyed doing at the piano was improvising. But I was quickly told by my parents and my teacher, don't do that. You should practice the scores that your teacher has given you. You're wasting your time. Later on in high school, in order to relate better to my peers, I went to a normal high school, not an arts school of any kind. Played guitar and electric keyboards in a number of bands, rock bands, a kind of pop and jazz band. And when I finally got to Curtis, a conservatory, I felt rather ashamed of this history, and I didn't tell anyone about it. But now, what's that?
How so?
Well, at an elite conservatory, I think it's fair to call conservatories like Curtis or Juilliard elite schools. There's a certain atmosphere, a certain expectation, and there's certain standards that students are expected to abide by, which conform to a kind of modern convention, a modern concert culture. So as a classical musician, to say, when I was a teenager, I enjoyed playing electric guitar in rock bands, I think there's a certain stigma attached to those kinds of explorations outside of classical music.
It's like you're doing things that are outside the box, right?
Right. It could even be viewed as disrespectful in a certain way. But now looking back, I view those experiences as formative and, in fact, really essential to what I'm doing now. So I'll get to what I'm doing now in a second. But after conservatories, my time at Curtis and Juilliard, during that time and afterwards, I entered a bunch of international competitions. I had about 8 years concertizing around the world. And during the pandemic, everyone's concert life was disrupted by this event. And so I looked for teaching jobs. And having known a lot of Chinese colleagues at conservatories, I reached out to them, and out of curiosity, I asked them if maybe there were any jobs available in China. And I ended up teaching in Hangzhou at the Zhejiang Conservatory for a while, and finally now I'm here in Tianjin. But I want to say that the most exciting performance experience that I've had actually just occurred. It was an improvisation concert with graduate students from Tianjin Juilliard that I did in collaboration with Chen Junhui, another faculty at the DFestival.
Sounds wonderful.
Well, I want to say I don't know how we did, but I feel like the students grew tremendously in just a short amount of time. And for me, it's almost like tracing my whole journey back to its roots in North Carolina, and also really grasping at what it means fundamentally to make music, to make something spontaneous and fragile that only exists in the moment. So
Hmm.
although it was somewhat nerve-wracking to improvise in front of a live audience,
Hmm.
I think it was the most life-affirming and fulfilling experience that I've had as a musician.
I see. Well, I believe, yeah, this is also, I mean, doing improvisation, you've been definitely one of the experts of this aspect. I think it really shaped who you are as a musician. Is that also true?
Yes, absolutely. I would certainly not call myself an expert. I mean, Junhui and I, well, I will speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like an ant standing next to a mountain when I improvise because when you improvise, as Robert Levin says, you're
Hmm.
showing everything that you know about music and also everything that you do not know.
Hmm.
Because to improvise, to make music spontaneously, you're drawing knowledge, you're drawing from your whole knowledge pool. If you want to
Hmm.
improvise in Mozart style, you know, the more you know about Mozart, the better. And
Mm.
you show everything that you know and don't know about Mozart when you improvise in that style. But I can say that even before, when I was concertizing more, when I was going around the world playing recitals, this improvisatory spirit certainly informed who I was and how I existed on stage as a performer of standard repertoire as well, because the spontaneity that you feel in improvisation can certainly be applied to standard repertoire.
Hmm. Yeah. It's like a spontaneous test right on the spot to see if you are really intelligent enough in many, many things, including knowing different styles of music and thematic materials, whether you should use this or that materials, and it's like a mix and match. So, and also it's difficult to make it sound compelling, right?
Well, I hope it's not a test of intelligence, or I would certainly fail right away, but because there are so many genius musicians in the world. But I love what you just said, mix and match. Actually, the word compose, the etymology of this word, the roots of the word, mean to put together.
Mm.
And in studying improvisation with Junhui, what we've learned is that music is really like Legos. There are all these preset patterns, and a great improviser or composer puts them together, which
Mhm.
is very interesting because the way that we learn music theory tends to be more kind of on an atomic level. Like we learn the meaning of this note or this harmony. But
Mm.
actually studying in this way of like more schematic way, learning these patterns of improvisation, when you return to standard repertoire, you kind of start to see that actually there are these larger patterns at work and the details are kind of just filled in. So for
Mhm.
example, the opening of Beethoven 109, before I
Mhm.
would have tried to analyze this as like, oh, that's a 1 and then 5 6. I would like try to think of what every harmony, uh, how the function of every harmony. But now I just realized the opening of this is a Romanesca, which is the name of a certain pattern assigned to a schemata by musicians from old conservatories in Naples, in Italy, way back in the 17th or 18th century. Yeah, and looking at music through that lens, I think it also helps us to understand why musicians from the late 19th and early 20th century played in a freer way. It's because they weren't looking at every harmony as something sacred and immutable, but they're actually feeling and understanding music in larger phrases, in larger patterns. So if you listen to a lot of modern pianists, they're really playing in a way that suggests that every single chord and note is sacred.
Mm.
But if you listen to someone like Francis Planté, a friend of Saint-Saëns, an old French pianist,
Mhm.
or Moritz Rosenthal, like student of Liszt, and Mikuli, you will find they're really not doing that. They're playing in larger units.
I
They're
see.
feeling they're feeling the length of every phrase, and they're understanding those bigger patterns. So after studying this, I really feel, although I'm just at the beginning of this journey, as I said, I really feel like an ant in front of a mountain. but I feel like I'm just beginning to speak the language of music for the first time.
How do you view the historical role of improvisation in classical music? And do you think, like, why do you think it has largely disappeared from modern classical performance nowadays?
Well, again, I'm not an expert in this subject by any means, but according to what I know, improvisation is one of the, if not the most fundamental way of making music. I mean, after all, there was music before there was musical notation. Improvisation is something very basic. And if you read accounts of all of the great composers we play, Bach, Chopin, Liszt, Beethoven, Mozart, they were all very famous for their improvisations. And furthermore, during their time, there wasn't really this separation between composer and performer.
That's true.
In fact, I'm not even sure that those terms like improviser, composer were used as much back then because there is not this separation. You were just
Do
a
everything.
musician, a pianist, a composer, whatever. Like you wouldn't say like this person is an improviser, this person is a composer, this person is a pianist. It's kind of like all of the above for everybody. So I think there are a few reasons why the tradition has disappeared. One is that in the 19th century, people started playing older music in concerts for the first time. And we know like Liszt has that famous quote, "I am the recital." Liszt said, for visual art, there's the museum. We need that for classical music. The recital is the museum for classical music. Of course, at that time, I didn't even use the phrase classical music. And so there started to be these recitals where you would present older repertoire. But whereas before, usually a work would only be played one time, and the next concert, the audience would expect something new. So that's one reason. There started to be there came into existence this standard canon of repertoire, which people became very familiar with, and audiences started to expect to hear certain pieces, and started to know them, have certain expectation. Also, repertoire started to get more and more technically demanding, so it became necessary to spend more time practicing just those pieces. Whereas like in the 18th century, people almost didn't even really practice. Like they just sight read things on stage or improvise, which is hard to believe now, but you have to remember like Beethoven told Czerny not to memorize music. Czerny brought a Beethoven sonata to Beethoven, memorized. And Beethoven said, "Oh, that's impressive, but don't do it again." So the modern tradition of performing, it has its own authenticity and coherence, but it's basically not related to how music was performed before. It's something separate. So when people say Beethoven this or that, what they mean is Beethoven from a modern perspective, this or that. Like this is how Beethoven is played now, typically, but certainly nothing to do with how Beethoven was played by Beethoven himself, which is not good or bad. It just is. And that's the same with language. Like if you watch movies set in the 18th century, like, people are usually dressed in costumes like the 18th century, but the language they're using, if they really spoke in a way that was truly authentic to the 18th century, no one would understand them today.
Is it like a different trend, traditions of doing the same thing?
Yes. Like Robert Jerningen, one of the authors on improvisation that we're reading, he said something just crazy, but I think it's Pride and Prejudice in this novel. The word hello is never written. So
Can you
like
elaborate a bit on that?
the meaning is just that the way you can think about language, language was just absolutely different at that time, and the whole way of communicating and social cues were so different at that time that if we were to really see a truly authentic dialogue, like a conversation between people during the time of Beethoven, like we wouldn't necessarily know what was going on. I mean, even just think about today, there are differences in culture between different countries, different languages. I mean, even within one country, and sometimes people don't understand each other, like they miss certain subtle social cues, right? Well, that gulf is much wider between now and Europe in the 18th or 19th centuries. And similarly, when it comes to playing, I mean, it's almost unrecognizable, I'm sure, what Beethoven or Mozart were really doing at that time. So
Which,
what we're doing,
Mhm.
what we're doing now is trying to just explore just a tiny bit of that spirit.
Yeah, I can. I'm actually wondering which late 19th or early 20th century pianists do you think they were innovative in the sense that about their approach to experimentation, maybe about the improvisation techniques they use, or the whole concept of how to improvise on the piano, and how did their work actually influence the piano repertoire?
Well, we are lucky to have a number of recordings by great composers improvising. For example, Granados, Albani, Sanson,
Mm.
even Busoni. There's one great recording of Busoni. He's playing Chopin A major prelude and Black Key Etude. And first of all, the prelude he repeats. He
Mhm.
just plays it twice, even though, you know, the da di dum bum bum, he just plays it twice. And the second time he plays it differently with like different voicing.
Mhm.
And then he improvises a short transition between that prelude and the Black Key Etude. So he doesn't stop playing. He like adds notes in between and connects the two. And then the Black Key Etude, he also adds two measures before the beginning comes back, and he adds some notes at the end as well. So I think that's a great example of one fabulous composer, Busoni, really interpreting the music of Chopin. And I use the word interpret like in the sense of really interpreting something, like trying to create meaning from something, trying to delve into the meaning of something, not just reproducing a score, but actually trying to create something new with it, which is certainly in line with Busoni's thinking about composition as well. So those are examples. And if you're speaking more about performers, of course, I mean, we have wonderful examples from, you know, more famous people like Rachmaninoff, Hoffman, Courtauld.
Mhm.
These are well, Rachmaninoff was a great composer, and Hoffman also composed, and Courtauld, I'm not sure if he actually composed, but he was a great conductor, and just, you know, I remember like Horowitz came to study with him, and he made Horowitz transcribe Beethoven string quartets for piano. So I think Courtauld really knew a lot, even if he didn't actually compose much himself. But I think those performers, even not speaking about their compositions, they brought a certain standing to the music. It's kind of like cooking. You know, I would just use the metaphor of cooking. I'm a terrible cook, I mean, really terrible. So like when I prepare something for myself, I
Uh-huh.
usually just find a recipe online and I follow it exactly. Because if I don't, if I try to do something a little different, then, you know, there's a great risk that I will fail. Even if I try to follow exactly, there's a great risk that I will fail.
I think we're on the same page.
Oh, I see, I see. Well,
Yeah.
we can see who's really worse in Xiamen maybe.
Let's see. Thank you for your responses. I think there's one more question about improvisation I want to emphasize on. Yeah, you mentioned about Carl Czerny. So he emphasized that improvisation requires solid harmonic understanding, excellent technique, and good musical memory. Yeah, that's a huge thing. How did the technical training of pianists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries support their improvisational abilities? And what do you think? What are the elements of this approach that might benefit today's music students?
That's a wonderful question. I think that in the earliest music schools or music conservatories rather in Italy, in Naples in the late 18th century, a music education tradition was created in which students began studying keyboard playing with improvisation, composition, and some practice of existing repertoire. But the center of this educational approach was improvisation. And I think that tradition continued to the 19th century. And so the great composers that we play they all learned how to play figured bass, how to improvise. They studied in Italian, this Italian method, which is called partimenti, and they developed a foundation of keyboard playing that included improvisation at its core. It wasn't like now you start with, hand position and learning scales and learning repertoire.
Mhm.
Like that was part of it, but it wasn't the main part. The main part was actually improvisation.
I see.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but just as an example of how it continued even into the 20th century, I know that Debussy, when he graduated from the Paris Conservatory, at the end of the 19th century, he won a prize in improvisation.
Hmm.
Like that was like one thing he did, in graduating.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe his teachers were not that happy about that back in the college, right? Because he's out
Uh,
of the box.
Actually, I think at that time it was not out of the box. It was just standard. At that time, if you didn't improvise and didn't compose, it would be regarded as, well, Robert Levin said that, like you would just be regarded as amateur, like you're not a professional musician.
We're not like a serious professional
Yeah,
industry.
like amateurs, like if they were learning like Mozart sonatas, or they would just play the notes.
Mm,
If you're a professional, you would know how to embellish and improvise around what was written.
I see. Is this like also one of the things you will introduce to your students? I mean, improvisation, like during your teaching in the studio. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Is there
yes.
a teaching method you've developed that you find effective for?
Well, Mr. Chen, Junhui and I, we are in the process of developing this method. It's not a method that we've invented. It's based on those old the methods developed in those old Italian conservatories. But we've already started teaching students, like my own students at Tianjin Juilliard, like with the ones who are interested, or slightly older students, I've already started doing this with them and found it to be very, very effective. So I will certainly try to introduce this method to students in Xiamen.
Yeah, we can't wait for you guys to give the DFestival's participants a workshop about the improvisation method. I'm sure it helps a lot with music students, like in terms of understanding the hidden codes behind the music, and it really helps getting out from learning musical terms just by definition. And like you said, so music is like about it's like Lego, building Legos. So let's switch gears for a fun final question. You've performed worldwide. Definitely. You've played many, many concerts, you've played in competitions. What's one item you always pack for your tour?
I don't know if this is such a fun answer,
Uh-huh.
but I like to pack a clock because I always want to know what time it is, but I don't want to look at my phone all the time. So I have a clock. I don't need to be distracted by my phone when I'm practicing or preparing for a
Is
concert
it
or
like an
somewhere.
electric clock or it's like the
I have
thing that kind
no.
of
I have a great friend who gave me like a kind of more old-fashioned, like more mechanical clock, but usually I just bring a digital one. I'm pretty boring.
Is it bulky?
Yeah, it is a little bit bulky, but I feel it's worth it. The burden is worth it.
I love you to send me a photo of your clock.
No, even better, I will bring it to Xiamen and you can see it.
That's wonderful. You gotta put it on the stage when you're giving masterclass.
Okay, I'll try to remember that.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing, such profound insights into the historical and contemporary aspect of piano improvisation. I think the knowledge and passion you have shared today are invaluable to everyone here at the festival and to our audience. Before we finish, we'd be delighted if you could share a personal invitation to this year's D Festival. What would you say to encourage someone to be part of this incredible event?
Well, to all the interested students out there, I think the DFestival in Xiamen promises a very supportive and open environment, outstanding teachers, opportunities such as masterclasses, chamber music, a competition, some workshops, maybe an improvisation workshop.
Lovely.
And it really just promises to be a summer filled with creativity, opportunities to explore imagination, and just an absolutely fantastic all-round experience. So hope to see you there.
Thank you so much for your message. We're looking forward to seeing you in the festival, and more we are looking forward to even more about your improvisation workshop. Thank you so much for agreeing to do the interview with us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. Really looking forward.